So welcome back everyone. Today we will be discussing triple resonance experiments in proteins. So far we have learned the 2D experiments. That is, if we want to draw a correlation between proton and nitrogen or proton and carbon, we saw that we can get a correlation map by making use of inept and spin echo type blocks, where on one axis we have proton chemical shift and on another axis any other correlated nuclei can be used. So for example, if you are talking about proton nitrogen or proton carbon, we can have something like this. So these are the correlation peaks, and in this particular case we are asking the experiment that we want a correlation between one bonded proton nitrogen or one bonded proton carbon. Similarly, there can be multiple bond correlations and all. So we have tried to understood now. Now let's say, so each of this peak here, so let's say this peak or that peak, each of this peak defines the local environment about the two nuclei which are being correlated. So for example, the proton chemical shift here and the nitrogen chemical shift here, delta values. So these delta values and the corresponding line width of that particular peak. So if we look this peak from sidewise, so we can see that there is some line width associated with it, which is the way we have learned in 1D NMR experiment. So these delta values, delta H, delta N, and the line width, these are the three parameters which are defined by the local structural environment around these two nuclei. So if there is any change in this local structural environment, we can expect to have change either in the line width or in the delta N or in the delta H or all three or any combination of these two, right? So depending on what is the time scale of the so let's say if there is a interaction between a protein and a ligand, and it forms a complex, protein ligand complex. So now what is the K1 and what is the K minus 1? That defines what kind of change will happen in these three parameters. Okay, so we'll not go into deep of these time scales, but what we are trying to see is that these peaks can act as reporter peaks for any structural perturbation or any dynamical perturbation. So, for example, if protein is undergoing any kind of structural information due to binding of a ligand, or protein is undergoing some sort of a folding event or unfolding event, for example, uh, the delta values and the line width values of these peaks are bound to change, and we can get some sense of where that change is happening in the protein. So now, as of now, it all looks like black dots to us, right? We don't know uh, which peak belongs to which amino acid. So what I mean is that, let's say if we have 100 amino acid long protein, then we have something like this, that you have NH, CHR, and then CO, NH, CHR, CO, and this goes on, right? So if you notice that this is a peptide bond over here, this is a peptide bond, and this one is one amino acid unit, this is another amino acid unit, right? So this is AA1, this is AA2, and it continues. So now if you have 100 amino acid, you will have 100 such NH correlations. So that means in a 2D experiment like this, you will get 100 such peaks. So 100 such correlations you will get. But what we have learned is that, okay, we will see each of this peak will report to the local environment, local structural environment of these NH bonds, but we don't know which peak belongs to which amino acid, for example, right? So we don't know whether this is glycine or this is a serine, that we don't know, or this is a arginine or lysine. So this we have no idea which peak belongs to what. So how to solve this problem? This is an important problem because unless we know which peak belongs to which NH, we don't know what type of structural perturbation is happening at what amino acid. So it will be basically a useless experiment unless we know the signature of all of these peak. So this particular problem is called as assigning the peaks to amino acids. Okay, so this is called as resonance assignment problem. So how do we solve this resonance assignment problem? What is the role of NMR? What kind of experiments we have to design? Okay, so so to explain this, let us discuss two experiments. One of the experiment is called as HNCA experiment. I will come to what does it mean. And a complementary experiment is called as HNCOCA. I will also tell you what is the meaning of this bracket over here, why there is no other bracket on any other nuclei. So what is the meaning of this HNCA and HNCOCA? Okay, so let us again draw the peptide and let's see. So you have NH, then you have C, let's call this as C alpha, C beta, H beta, let's leave this blank, H alpha, and then call this as C prime, double bond O, then you have NH, peptide bond, and then again you have C alpha, C beta, H beta, and let's call it as H alpha again, C prime, double bond O, and so on, right? So I'll also write down the coupling, typical coupling constant values which are used for various transfer of polarizations. So you know how in using inept we can use transfer of polarization. So which basically uses the coupling constant, scalar coupling constant. So this is a typical values of these scalar coupling constants I'm writing, and I'm ignoring the sign. Some of them are negative, some of them are positive. So I'm just writing the positive values, just the magnitude. So this is 11 hertz and all these values are in hertz. This is just to show an example that how these values are different. 55 hertz, and this one is I think 15 hertz, and there is a coupling between these two also, 7 hertz, and so on. Right, this is, I think this should be sufficient to understand the experiment. Okay, so for these experiments, one important thing is that the protons are protons have natural abundance of 100%. I mean close to 100%. Or 100% actually, but for spin half isotope, right? So there is a deuterium also and tritium, but those are not present, or maybe you can say negligible presence. But for nitrogen, we have to make these, so the natural abundance is only 0.37%. So you can imagine the sensitivity, which will be very less if we want to record a 15N experiment. Similarly for 13C, the natural abundance is only 1.1%. So again the sensitivity is not as low as nitrogen, but it is still very low as compared to proton, right? So what one has to do is one has to enrich the nitrogen and carbon with N15 isotope and C13 isotope respectively. So how do you do that? So this is done by something called as recombinant DNA technology. So I'll not go into details of it, but let me just give a brief introduction so that we are all on same page. So basically what we do is we take a bacterial cell, and so this is bacteria. Mostly we are using E. coli, and within bacteria what we do is we insert a plasmid. So plasmid is a piece of circular DNA, so it's a double stranded circular DNA, and in that, let me change the color. So you have a segment of DNA. Let's call this as, this is a plasmid DNA, and this particular portion is cDNA. So the sequence of this cDNA is inserted, uh, uh, is basically dependent on the sequence of required protein. Okay, so once it is there, bacteria has, and then you also insert start codon, so that your protein expression starts here, and a stop codon. Okay, so this has nothing to do with NMR, but I'm just trying to explain that how do we get N15 and C13 in a protein. Okay, so what we do is we insert this engineered plasmid into the bacterial cell, so that we know that it will express protein of a given sequence which is required by us. And bacteria has its own RNA polymerase. So bacteria has the capability to basically sit on this DNA. RNA polymerase will sit on this DNA, and then it will start expressing, and it will generate mRNA, right? And from mRNA, it will also has its own ribosome and the other translational machinery, so it will give rise to this protein of interest. Okay, so now imagine that if you feed this bacteria the nitrogen source as 15N labeled. So in our case, in the media, what we add is 15N ammonium chloride, and glucose is fed as 13C labeled glucose, and this is provided in the media where the bacteria has to grow, right? So if in the media you are providing ammonium chloride which is labeled with N15 and glucose which is labeled with C13, and this is the only source of nitrogen and only source of carbon, so all the nitrogen and carbon which is being used by bacteria will translate into the protein, and the protein will be labeled, isotopically labeled with N15 and C13. So that is how we get in our lab N15 labeled and C13 labeled. Of course, these are expensive materials. Both are, so they require a lot of dollars, of course. But having said that, this is routinely done in most structural biology labs now, and we don't work only on the proton-proton correlation. So we do use proton-nitrogen and proton-carbon correlations. All right. Okay. So this is how we get labeled molecules. And now let us say how do we. So what is the experiment, and how do we work with that experiment? So typical correlation pathway for HNCA experiment works like, so you start with HN, that is amide proton, transfer the magnetization to nitrogen. So this is done using scalar coupling between proton and nitrogen, which is around 92 hertz or 90 hertz. And you also label, at this point you also evolve under chemical shift, so you label it with T1. So this is the first dimension. Okay, so T1 labeling is done. Then from T1 the magnetization is transferred to C alpha, as well as C alpha of I minus 1. So if you notice here. So proton, so I'm now drawing the magnetization transfer pathway. So proton to nitrogen. So let me draw the other one on the other from here. So from proton to nitrogen, from nitrogen to C alpha, and this C alpha also, because the coupling constant in this one it is 11 hertz and this one is 7 hertz. So inept delay would not be able to differentiate between whether the magnetization is getting transferred from nitrogen to self C alpha or to previous residue, C alpha of previous residue. So let's say if we call this as ith residue, ith amino acid, this will be I minus 1th amino acid, right? And this will be I plus 1th amino acid. Okay, so because the coupling constants are 7 and 11 hertz, so from nitrogen, when you're transferring the magnetization, it will go to C alpha of I as well as C alpha of I minus 1. So that's how I have written here, C alpha of I to C alpha of I minus 1. So from there, the magnetization now will go to Ni and Ni minus 1, and then it will also go like this, right? Because again there is no differentiation, and then this will go to Hi, this will go to Hi minus 1, right? And you also label frequency label here using so chemical shift evolution, while the magnetization is on C alpha, you evolve under chemical shift, and then this is the acquisition part, T3. Okay, and this is the regular inept over here. So from nitrogen to C alpha, so you evolve under NC alpha coupling, again you evolve under NC alpha coupling, and here you evolve under NH coupling, right? So you can understand that what sort of pulse program blocks are involved. So you have inept here, reverse inept here, reverse inept here, right? Okay, so let me just draw quickly a quick and dirty HNCA pulse program. It may not be accurate, but I'll just try to draw one. So you have proton channel, nitrogen channel, C alpha channel. Okay. Okay, so from proton you first go to via inept, you go to nitrogen, right? So this is inept part, then you decouple proton and evolve, this is 180, and then you evolve under nitrogen chemical shift. So this is T1 labeling over here which is happening, and then while nitrogen is being T1 labeled, so you also place 180 degree pulses strategically, so that you also simultaneously use this as inept. So this is first inept over here, this is second inept over here, while T1 labeling is happening during this period, during nitrogen evolution. Okay, now so the placement of this 180 degree pulse is not exactly at the center, and this one is also not exactly at center, while this is calculated strategically so that overall proton is being decoupled during this time, and nitrogen chemical shift is being evolved, and nitrogen to carbon transfer is also happening. Okay, so these are the few parameters which one has to see, and accordingly place these pulses, these 180 degree pulses accordingly. Okay, so now again, so at this point you have carbon antiphase magnetization, right? At this point it was nitrogen antiphase, now you have carbon antiphase magnetization. So once you have carbon antiphase magnetization, again you evolve chemical shift evolution. So this is T1 period, then you have T2 period over here, and then nitrogen and proton has to be decoupled. So these are decoupled, and then you carry out reverse inept. So this is reverse inept, and then again reverse inept to transfer the magnetization back to proton. Okay, and then you evolve here under T3. So proton is labeled over here, carbon is labeled over here T2, and nitrogen is labeled in T1. And then you decouple nitrogen as well as carbon. Okay, so all of these are decoupled. Okay, so this is the basic pulse program scheme. So I have not written explicitly all the delays or all the uh, phase cycling or phases, but typically there's a long phase cycling. Typical phase cycling is of 8 or 16 scans, but let's not go into those details. The uh, focus here is that there is a basic inept which tries to transfer the magnetization from proton to nitrogen, and then there is a spin echo type period so that nitrogen chemical shift evolution can happen. Simultaneously, you also transfer from nitrogen to C alpha, and then carbon chemical shift evolution happens. Then you transfer back from proton to nitrogen, and then from proton nitrogen to proton, right? And then again proton chemical shift evolution will happen. Okay, so now the magnetization transfer pathway is clear. I hope it is clear. uh, Let us see how do we what kind of information are we getting. So let's say if we have a proton nitrogen correlation and we are getting some peaks. Okay, so let's say now we are taking a slice which is this. So at this particular delta value, so let's call this as, let's say this range is typically 105 to 135 ppm, and if you are talking about amide protons, this range is typically 7 to 10 ppm. Okay, so let's say this is 125 ppm chemical shift, and let's say that this is some chemical shift A and B. Okay, okay, so this is the regular HSQC experiment where proton and 15N are correlated. Okay, now how the HNCA experiment would look like. So HNCA, now there instead of only proton and nitrogen, there is also a carbon chemical shift which is being evolved, right? So what happens here is, so instead of a plane, what you are getting is a three-dimensional cube. There has to be three axes, right? So you have proton, you have nitrogen, and you also have carbon. Now what do I mean by that? Let's say if we are taking a slice at 125 ppm nitrogen chemical shift value, so you take the same slice at this value at delta 125 ppm. Okay, so now the slice would go all the way in the cube, right? So this is the plane which we are talking about. This is the slice. Now when you take a slice in a two-dimensional experiment, it appears like a line. When you take a slice in three-dimensional experiment in HNCA, it appears like a plane, right? At same delta value of 125 ppm. Now if you extract this plane, so you have this plane is extracted at delta n equal to 125. Okay, so you can extract as many planes as is the least count of these chemical shift. So for example 125.1, 125.2, 125.3, and so on and so forth. So all of these planes can be extracted. So right, so now let's talk about this one plane 125 ppm, and the this side is now carbon chemical shift delta C and delta H, right? So now let's say that if you notice here that we had two peaks at 125 ppm, two peaks in nitrogen. So that means the same two peaks will come somewhere at the same chemical shift of proton, So A and B. So you will get two peaks, but not necessarily at same chemical shift values of carbon, because their respective C alpha values will be different. So this is a delta C alpha and this is delta C alpha, right? Okay. Now we can also understand that because the magnetization is transferring from nitrogen of uh, nitrogen I to C alpha of I as well as C alpha of I minus 1. This is happening with 11 hertz of coupling constant. This is happening with 7 hertz of coupling constant. That means while this coupling, if you use your inept delay which is optimized for 11 hertz, then 7 hertz transfer will not be as efficient. Vice versa, if you optimize with respect to 7 hertz, then 11 hertz transfer will not be as efficient, right? So because in inept delay this tau has to be 1 by 4j, and this value can be only one j value. So if you take this j value as 11 hertz or 7 hertz, it will give you an efficient transfer for only one of those coupling constants. The other transfer will not be as efficient. So that means, let us say that if you are optimizing for 11 hertz, then 7 hertz is not efficient. But even though it is not efficient process, you will still get two peaks. So for each nitrogen proton correlation peak over here, you will get two peaks in carbon, where one peak will be high in intensity and other peak will be low in intensity, right? So low peak is, I'm showing with a narrower dot. Okay, so now this is nothing but C alpha of I minus 1 residue. This is also C alpha of I minus 1 residue. So the point is that for each HSQC peak, each proton nitrogen correlation peak, you should get two peaks in that particular nitrogen slice, where one peak, which is high intensity peak, is of C alpha I, and the other low intensity peak is of C alpha I minus 1. So now let's say for each peak, if you make a list of such peaks, so for each HSQC peak, C alpha I and C alpha I minus 1, right? So you have the delta values of it, right? So now what you can do is you can compare this C alpha I minus minus 1 values and C alpha I values to match which of these two peaks are in sequential connection to each other. So let's say if this is my I minus 1 peak and this is my I peak, I mean in the primary sequence of the protein, if this is my I minus 1 residue and this is my I residue, then their C alphas will be connected. So for example, if the C alpha of this particular peak or C alpha minus 1 of this particular peak will be C alpha of this peak, right? So that is how, what you do is, that is how you try to correlate different peaks and find out the sequential connection between these two. So if there is any confusion, we can of course discuss during this during the interaction session and have it more clear. But what you typically do is you make strips like this. So each strip is at a different 15 and delta n value. So delta n, let's say 1, delta n2, delta n3, delta n4, delta n5, delta n6, and this is at corresponding delta h1, delta h2, delta h3, delta h4, delta h5, delta H6. Suppose there are 6 amino acids in your protein, so you make all these strips. Now find out their C alpha and C alpha minus 1. Now let's say for the second peak, this is your C alpha minus 1 and this is your C alpha. Now this is your C alpha minus 1 and this is your C alpha. So the smaller peak is C alpha I minus 1 and the bigger peak is C alpha of I. Okay. Now what you have to do is you have to see that how these are matching in chemical shift, carbon chemical shift. Similarly here, okay. So these strips, what I have done is I have arranged these strips so that you can see that I minus 1 of this is actually I C alpha I of the previous residue. Similarly, I minus 1 of this is I peak of this residue, and so on and so forth. So you can keep on connecting, but what in real life, these strips are not arranged by themselves. So these strips are lying around all over the place, and you need to find whether this strip will match with this, or this will match with this, or this will match with this, and so on and so forth, right? But all of this matching, because this is matching of numbers, because you are reading some numbers over here, some numbers over here, so this process is now largely automated, and artificial intelligence or computational softwares are there which will match these peaks for you if you give all the data, and they will tell that okay, within HSQC, H1 is preceding to H2, H2 is preceding to H3, H3 is preceding to H4, and so on and so forth, right? So this is how triple resonance experiments are used. Similarly, another triple resonance experiment which is complementary to HNCA is called as HNCOCA. We'll quickly look at this, look at the magnetization transfer pathway of that. So here what we are doing is we are taking the magnetization from proton, amide proton to nitrogen. So whenever I'm saying that I'm transferring the magnetization, I'm always using the inept here. Inept. So inept is by JNH. Then from nitrogen, instead of C alpha, what I'm doing is I'm taking the magnetization to C prime, that is the carbonyl carbon. So I'm using NC prime, and because I'm taking it to NC prime and then to C alpha, so I'm using C prime C alpha, I am only going to I minus 1 residue, and there is no C alpha I transfer. Okay, so why is that? Because if you notice over here, so let me choose a different color for this transfer. Let's take orange. So here what I'm doing is I'm going from proton to nitrogen, then nitrogen to carbonyl, and then carbonyl to C alpha, and then back in the same way. Okay, so you go back in the same way, exact same way. So C alpha to carbonyl, carbonyl to nitrogen, and nitrogen to proton again. Okay, so there is no chance, because we are evolving NC prime coupling, and this NC prime coupling is very very weak, so it does not evolve. So you only transfer to your previous residue. So and then again C prime to C alpha, it will only go in one direction. So basically, by doing this, by invoking NC prime coupling and then C prime C alpha coupling, what you do is you actually provide directionality to this experiment. So instead of having this transfer from N to C alpha and N to C alpha I minus 1, what you do is you only transfer this pathway here. Okay, so you don't go this pathway, the other one. Okay, so what is the advantage here? So the advantage is that, so you have C alpha I minus 1, then again you go back to C prime, again you go back to nitrogen, and then proton. and corresponding coupling constants are used. Now you label this nitrogen with T1, C alpha with T2, and proton with T3. So now if you look at the proton carbon at a particular delta nitrogen, let's say same 125 ppm, so what you will get is you will get, instead of 4 peaks, you will get only 2 peaks, and both of them will be C alpha of I minus 1 and C alpha of I minus 1. So now if you compare this with HNCA spectrum, so let's say this is HNCA and this is HNCOCA. So now if you see that the bracket is used because the magnetization is transferred via carbonyl, so that's why there is a bracket used, but this is not frequency labeled. Okay, so used to transfer and no chemical shift labeling. Okay, so now here what kind of peaks you will see? So you will get C alpha minus 1, and then you will get C alphas. Okay, so basically here for each peak you were getting 2 peaks, whereas here you are getting only 1 peak, which is C alpha I minus 1. So even if you can't judge whether this particular peak is C alpha or C alpha I minus 1, you can easily compare the two signals, two spectra, and say which one of them is C alpha and which one of them is C alpha I minus 1. But the overall idea of analysis is still the same, that you have to find out for each HSQC peak, each proton nitrogen correlation, you have to find out the C alpha as well as C alpha I minus 1, and then try to match up all those peaks to find out that which two peaks are connected with each other. And at some point of time you will reach at the terminal where you will not be able to proceed further. So for example, if you have a sequence, let's say A, S, F, L, R, A, so at this point there would not be any C alpha I minus 1 signature because there is no amino acid at the start. So this is your N terminal. So if you reach at the N terminal, you don't have any C alpha I minus 1. So in HSQC or in HNCA experiment, there you will get only a single peak there, right? So and in HNCOCA experiment, you will not get any peak corresponding to this alanine HSQC peak, right? So this is a, broadly speaking, this is how a triple resonance experiment are used in to carry out the resonance assignment of a given protein. So this is just one example. There are plenty of triple resonance experiments, and there is no time to, of course, discuss all those experiments. But the basic ideology of how these experiments work is very, very similar. Okay, so that is all for today, and I hope I have not confused you further, and we can, of course, discuss during the interaction session if there is anything. All right, that is all for today. Thank you.